If you like to follow along with this tutorial, I'm going to provide a link below in the description so you can go to my website and download original footage. I'm probably not going to have the actual raw file. I'm probably going to compress to H.264 or some other smaller format so you guys can easily download it online. But it's going to be there, and by the time you're going to be watching this tutorial, check out the link, all the footage and everything going to be on my blog. I'm going to drag the clip that we're going to be working on today right over here, and it's going to ask us to change the current project. Alright, let's drag it on the timeline and create new timeline. So now we are ready to start color grading. Okay, so the first node, let's click Alt S and create a new serial node. And I've shot this footage with Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. So the footage that you see, it's in a film, aka log. And a few things we can do. We can actually make this look like Rec 709 into camera raw settings, or I can apply the LUT. Since I'm working with the raw, let's do it over here in the settings. Let's select clip, white balance as shot, color space, Blackmagic design, or we can choose Rec 709. And gamma, we have few here to select, but let's keep it at Rec 709. ISO 800, which is perfectly fine because it's an 85 ISO. And highlight. Before we continue, let me go back to the log look, and I can see actually in the original log, I have more details in the highlights instead of making it look like that. So I want to preserve as much information as possible. Even though I can technically lower some settings over here, like for example highlights, and see what's gonna happen. I guess that kind of works. Sure, we can continue like that. Another method, it's actually convert the footage to Rec 709 manually, but since this one in particular working, let's stick to it and we're gonna continue working like that. Okay, so I'm gonna keep this node over here. This is gonna be our like a main final master node. In the first node, first of all, I want to take care a little bit of the noise. Blackmagic camera is not particularly great into relatively low light conditions. That's why a lot of people like to overexpose them a little bit, or it's also known exposing to the right. So before we're going to continue grading, I'm actually going to clean up a little bit, and I'm going to do 3 frames. And remember, cleaning the footage will definitely affect the quality of how finally you can grab a second keyer, or adjustments like that. Also, it increases the impact on your computer, so whenever you do noise reduction in the first node, keep that in mind, because later down the road it may not be ideal solution for you. But since I'm only working with one clip, just for the sake of this tutorial, what the hell, why not? Okay, I'm gonna do better. Motion, medium is fine, and let's start increasing a little bit. Alright, you can see right away how much of a difference that it made. Perfect, now we can start grading. I'm gonna create a new serial node, and I'm gonna call this one mood. And what do I mean by that? And again, this tutorial design rather showing you the capabilities of the program instead of actually following the correct order of adjustments. So if you're semi-experienced colorist, or if you work with a color grading program before, don't judge me on that. I'm just trying to show as many tools as possible in this tutorial without really following the proper procedures, okay? So, mood. This kind of looks like a little dark and murky. We actually shot this in Tijuana. So what I want to do, I kind of want to give a little cinematic feel to it. So I'm gonna go into window panel right over here, and I'm gonna create my own window around this sort of hole over here on the ceiling. And we can see how beautiful the light just falls sideways. And I kind of want to amplify this to create a little bit more dramatic effect. Okay, so I'm gonna select a very rough mask, also known as a garbage mask, if you guys are familiar with the visual effects. Okay, so let's do it. And if I'm gonna turn on highlights over here, we can see what I selected. Now, let's soften the edges a little bit, because right now it kind of looks ugly. Okay, so we softened it a little bit. Let's soften a little bit outside. So basically we feathering the selection. Okay, so that looks great. Another thing, I kind of only want to affect the brightest parts of this image to kind of mimic the light falling down. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to click on qualifier over here. And in the third panel, I'm only going to be affecting luminance, which means brightness. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to crank it up a little bit, so I'm not going to be affecting the darkest part. Okay, that should do. Let's again soften it a little bit. Okay, let's kind of push it like that. Let's blur it. Okay, so like that looks great. And now I can give it a little bit of punch with the color wheel, just like that. And we can see how big of a difference that I made. Look how more dramatic it looks, even though the selection is very minimal relatively. Okay, so that's great. Let's create another one, and I'm gonna call this one mood number 2. And again, you can do everything in one, but I like to work in a separate nodes. That way I have more control. Also, by the way, if we go back into first mood, we can see, let me turn on selection, we can see that the mask is actually not sticking around. So what I can do, I can track the mask so it looks like the light physically belongs there. Okay, I'm gonna turn off perspective. I have no perspective going on. I have no zoom going on. And you can still track with those parameters checked, but if none of those things going on in your shot, there's no reason for you to waste extra computing power. Plus, it actually increases the chance of getting an error. So let's track forward from this point. Okay, now let's go back in the middle and let's track backwards. Okay, and now if we're gonna play back the shot, we actually see how it's nice sticking to the actual light source. So it looks like this light actually belongs there. Okay, mood number 2. I'm gonna work now, let me show you the whole picture. I'm gonna work in this part of the image now a little bit. And for this one, I'm gonna use this type of mask, sort of gradient type of the mask. Okay, just like that. I'm gonna place it over here. And again, if we're gonna turn on selection, we can actually see how the mask affecting what I'm doing. And if I'm gonna increase this thing, we're basically feathering this thing more. Okay, so same situation. I'm gonna go into qualifier. I'm only gonna work on the shadows. I mean, on the highlights. Okay, like that looks decent enough for the tutorial. Okay, let's blur it. Okay, perfect. And now again, I'm gonna increase the highlights to kind of give it a nice little pop. For this particular feather, we don't have to track it down because it's coming from an angle, and if person who watches this have no clue what we've done before, they never be able to tell that this is not 100% sticking. So in certain cases, you really don't have to track anything down. Okay, so that looks great. Now let's check it out, the whole thing really quick before and after. Okay, we see how, even though little, but also how much of an impact we've made. Next note, let's add a little bit of glow. Okay, I'm gonna type in glow, and for this glow, I kind of have ugly shots over here that show chromatic aberration, which I really don't like. And what we can do here is go to the open effects, and if we're gonna type in glow, Davinci have a nice glow preset that sort of can give that nice hazy feel to it. Again, I'm gonna go into the mask, and I just want to have the glow right around this little cracks. So I'm gonna do very rough garbage mask like that. Okay, let's track this really quick. Also, okay, and then from this point, I personally always like to track sort of from the middle of the shot or from the best angle possible. It's actually give you a much better track rather than starting from the very beginning or very end. Okay, so that's sticking around. Again, just for the sake of it, let's have a nice feathering. Let's go back into effects and start decreasing the threshold of the glowing. Okay, let's see. Okay, very nice. Again, let's go to the third one, and we kind of can see a little bit like that. Let's soften it. Alright, blur radius. Okay, perfect. Let's check it out. Before and after. Before and after. So that kind of gave a little hazy feel to it. And for some reason, if you feel that there's too much, you can always go right over here to the key window, and you can dial down the key output of how much your effect affecting the image. So let's do half. I don't want to do it too much. So really quick, before and after. Okay, so that looks good. Now I can combine all these three, right click, create compound node. And basically now I have all those selections in one node. So I can see exactly what I've done. And again, we can rename this, and I can have a single node as the mood. Let's start talking about the basic look of this. So I'm gonna do first one, the contrast. I'm gonna adjust a little bit of the contrast, and I'm gonna use actual contrast setting over here. I'm gonna crank it up just a little bit. Okay, that looks great. Now pivot. Let's see which way we go, front or back. Okay, I kind of like that. Pivot sort of affects the medium of your contrast effect. You can see on the waveform when I move, you can see exactly what's going on. Alright, so I really like this. Let's go back again, before and after. So that looks great. Now let's check it out how the whole thing looks on the big screen. Alright, let me loop this and let me play it back. So that looks very nice. And before any adjustments, we have kind of empty shot a little bit. Okay, perfect. Let's go back and let's start creating a look a little bit. New node, I'm gonna type in look. And by the way, remember, whenever you do color grading, you don't have to really push your parameters crazy that it kind of looks funny, you know. Color grading is about very minute adjustments that in the end will give a nice overall feeling. You don't have to be cranking things down, you know, to make it look kind of like that, what a lot of people like to do, you know, the standard teal and orange. Just very small, tiny adjustments. Okay, remember that. So now look, let's start dialing the color wheels, or also we can do with the curves, depending what you like. Sometimes I use curves, sometimes I use color wheels. It doesn't really matter. So let's adjust it. Okay, shadows. Let's cool down shadows a little bit. Okay, kind of. Okay, like that. Midtones. Okay, a little warmer. Okay, and for the highlights, we can either leave them alone, or we can go a little bit on the greenish side. Alright, so like that looks interesting. Let's check it out really quick. Before and after, and we can see I barely made any difference. So again, full screen. So this was before, and this is after. I kind of gave it overall toning of the entire image. Now, let's say that I like this, the client liked this, and we're ready to move on. Let's start paying attention to details now. I'm gonna do another node, and I'm gonna call this one details. Okay, and again, I'm gonna use a little custom mask over here, a garbage mask, and I'm gonna select this clothing, or actually like a linen, whatever they had in this repair shop. Okay, let's close the mask. Again, let's see what we selected. Let's give it a nice feather, a little inside so we have no spill. And let's say that the client wants viewer to pay attention what's going on in this part. So first of all, of course, again, let's give it a nice track. And this is relatively easy shot, so tracking shouldn't be a problem. Okay, like that looks great. Now let's track it backwards. Okay, it takes a few seconds. Alright, so that looks great. Now I want to increase a little bit of details in that shot. So let me crank up a little bit of midtones. And whenever you crank up midtones, always remember that the image starts falling apart a little bit. So it becomes brighter, but at the same time it starts becoming very visible that this thing doesn't belong. So we can counter that by cranking a little bit of contrast to compensate for our luminance, since we made it brighter. Okay, so like that looks much better. Let's check it out before and after. Okay, so let's zoom in, and now I want to give more details. There's two things you can do. You can either go into blur panel and you can give it a little bit more sharpness. Okay, let's check out again before and after. Huge difference. Okay, let's reset the blur. Or you can go into midtone details and just start increasing it up, and then we'll increase the details in the midtones. Let's check it out before and after. Before and after. Okay, so whatever way you want to do in your particular situation, it all makes a difference. Alright, now that we have this covered, let's move on. I'm gonna call this one details number 2. And let's now focus on this wall over here. I'm gonna use very sloppy circular mask. Okay, just like that. Let's place it over here. Again, let's give it a nice quick tracking. And keep in mind what I'm showing you guys, you don't have to do this for every shot. I'm just, again, trying to cover as much things as possible so you sort of have a basic knowledge of what new DaVinci Resolve can do in terms of color grading and selecting things. Alright, so for this one, I kind of want to give a little highlight pop. Okay, how we're going to do this? I'm going to use log control, okay, over here. And basically what log does, it's a same like normal color wheels, but more precise. You can actually dial it a low range and a high range where you want your log controls to take effect. So in this shot, let me zoom in. I kind of want the highlights to pop. So let me increase the highlights. And as you can see, nothing happens. But if I'm going to start playing with the high range, check it out. So let me start decreasing it, and you can see that I start getting into more like a mid-tone zone, and it started affecting the entire image. Okay, let me increase the feather. Alright, and let's check it out what we've done. Again, before and after. Before and after. Each of those controls have very particular usage. It's not all the times you need to use log control. I personally am not a big fan of using log. I rather do it with the curves. But again, for the sake of this tutorial, that works. Alright, so let me group those things. That way they're not on our way. And we're going to call this one look. Alright. So let's now give this whole thing a more cinematic feel. Again, I'm not the fan of applying LUT, but we can emulate a film print to give it more cinematic feel to it. Right click, go to the LUTs, 3D LUT, okay, film looks, and let's select codec 2383. And we can choose between D55 or D65, the temperature. So let's do D65. Let's start increasing the shadows, because it crashed a lot of shadows. Okay, just like that. And we can drop down a little bit of highlights. Okay, or we can go into this panel and we can just drop highlights down just like that. All right, so let's take a look at this adjustment, before and after, before and after. Much better, but I think this looks a little bit too strong for my taste. So I'm gonna key down the output, and let's say I want to settle to about 60% of the strength of this adjustment. So before and after looks great. Now let's go and take a look how our grading looks entirely. Before and after, before and after. So that looks pretty cool. Let's play back really quick and see how it looks. We have a little bit of smoke going on. So I think this shot looks very cinematic. Okay, let's go back. What else can we cover? Well, we can add a nice ratio. We can add nice letterbox over here. If we're gonna go, and they've been moving this thing, so excuse me really quick. I believe now it's on a timeline. Output blanking, and we can select 235 or 240. Okay, so that gives definitely more cinematic feel to it. And if I want to play around with the image up or down to kind of fit it within the letterboxing, I can do it over here in the tilt menu. Okay, so we can kind of do it like that. Okay, and now this looks very cinematic. So again, let's do before and after. And guys, as you can see, with a very few adjustments, we made this thing look way more cinematic than what it is. But let's say you want to do a very selective color. Let's say you don't want to have the whole thing look very monotone. Okay, we can also dial some things back. Let's say that this shadow over here, I want to make it look more blue. Okay, for whatever reason. Let's say the client say, oh, I don't want things to be monotone. I kind of want to have more life. Okay, no problem. We can again select the garbage mask. Okay, we can track it. Alright, so now it looks great. Again, let's make it softer. Let's go somewhere in the middle frame. And in the mid-tone, I'm just gonna give it a little bit more blue. Just like that. Okay. And if we take a look, now we sort of have this thing sticking out, and it looks a little strange, but depending what people want, it may be the look they're going after. So this is the basics of DaVinci Resolve. How you use those tools, it's clearly up to you. There's multiple variations what you can do. You can, without any masking, also use the qualifier, which is secondaries. Let me create a new node, and I'm going to show you how secondaries work. Let's say I want to just select this headlight or whatever light it is. I'm going into qualifier, and I'm just going to click on it. Okay, let's turn on the highlights, and we can see that only this thing been selected. Now, if I'm going to make my selection, my hue, a little wider, we can see other colors start to be introduced into the shot. Let's now play with the saturation. Is saturation does anything for us? Not really. What about luminance? Also not really. So our only hope over here to kind of play around with this. And it selects it very well, but along with that, other things, a lot of other things being selected. So again, let's make this very narrow. Okay, I'm trying to. Ideally, you kind of want to have one mask per object or per item, but just for the sake of tutorial. Okay, there we go. Let's close it. Let's track this really quick. Okay. Not the perfect track, not the perfect selection, but it's gonna do it for the sake of tutorial. Alright, so we have this selected. Let's say I wanted to look more red. Okay, I'm gonna go in the color boost, and I'm just gonna increase the color boost. And now we can see before and after, how much difference it made. Now let's say I don't want it to be red. I want it to be a different color. No problem. If we select this, we can play around with hue and it's gonna change the color. Just like that. Okay, perfect. And let's have the full screen. And if we play it back, we have our changes sticking to whatever we changed or increased or decreased. So thanks for watching this. Make sure to subscribe. I'll be making more videos like that sometime next week, and I'll see you guys very soon.